Stitam Kalena Natidirghena Bhagavan Vishate Hridi Srinvata Shadaya Nityam Grinatascha Sachestitam Kalena Natidirghena Bhagavan Vishate Hridi Srinvata of those who hear Shadaya in earnestness Nityam regularly always Grinata taking the matter Cha also Swachestitam seriously by one's own endeavour Kalena duration Na not Ati dirghena very prolonged time Bhagavan the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna Vishate becomes manifest Hridi within one's heart. Persons who hear Srimad Bhagavatam regularly and are always taking the matter very seriously will have the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna manifested in their hearts within a short time. Responsively, please. Persons who hear Srimad Bhagavatam regularly and are always taking the matter very seriously will have the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna manifested in their hearts within a short time. Purport. Cheap devotees or materialistic devotees of the Lord are very much desirous to see the Lord personally without meeting the requisite qualifications. Such third-grade devotees should know well that material attachment and seeing the Lord face to face cannot go together. It is not such a mechanical process that the professional Bhagavatam reciters can do the job on behalf of the third-grade materialistic pseudo-devotee. The professional men are useless in this connection because they are neither self-realized nor interested in liberation of the audience. They are simply interested in maintaining the material establishment of family attachment and earning some material benefits out of the profession. Maharaj Parikshit had no more than 7 days to live, but for others, Maharaj Parikshit personally recommends that one hears Srimad Bhagavatam regularly, nityam, always by one's own effort with serious devotion also. With serious devotion also. That will help one to see the Lord Sri Krishna manifested in one's heart within no time. The pseudo-devotee, however, is very anxious to see the Lord according to his whims, not making any serious effort to hear Srimad Bhagavatam regularly and without detachment from material benefit. That is not the way recommended by authorities like Maharaj Parikshit, who heard and benefited by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. So Prabhupada's very strongly condemning those who make a show of spiritual life or make a show of being a hearer of Srimad Bhagavatam. And it seems like he's specifically addressing these, what we see in India regularly, these things called Bhagavat Saptahas, where for 7 days they'll sit down and discuss the intimate pastimes of Radha and Krishna and the gopis in Braj, imitating this exchange of Parikshit Maharaj and Shukadev Goswami. But as Prabhupada points out here, they actually lack the required qualification. We see here that Sukadev Goswami is the most qualified person to speak the Bhagavatam. He has no material desire whatsoever, and he's actually, we see earlier on in the Bhagavatam, particularly in the first canto, how Sukadev Goswami is being glorified by the personalities that are present there. present there. And one verse in particular that it mentions, I don't remember the verse exactly. I've been trying to learn it for a couple of years, but I'm not having a lot of luck with it. But it mentions there how Sukadeva Goswami, he's such a qualified person that he's actually able to enter into the heart of the qualified listener and to purify their heart and actually, establish this understanding of the Bhagavatam within their heart. And so we see here, very, very qualified. And then if we look, I think it's in the 14th chapter of the Nectar Devotion, where it talks about the results of practicing devotional service. And there we see that Rupa Goswami, he's listed the nine processes of bhakti, and he also lists the devotees who perfect themselves through the process of bhakti. And so, as we know, the nine processes, thank you, Maharaj. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. That, it starts off with hearing and chanting. So Prabhupada often emphasizes these are the two most important processes. And we see that Parikshit Maharaj, he perfected himself through the process of hearing. And then Sukadeva Goswami perfected himself through the process of chanting the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Prabhupada's very strongly establishing how both Sukadeva and Parikshit, and not just here but in many places throughout the Bhagavatam, he establishes very strongly how they are actually the perfect persons, the most qualified persons to be speaking the Bhagavatam and to hear the Bhagavatam. And that if we follow in that line, then very quickly we will achieve the same success. And this is the point that's being made here, where it says, I think it's Kalena Natidirgena, that in a very short time this becomes, how Krishna becomes manifest in the heart. Letting the air out of the speaker. Because as we see, it's explained elsewhere, this, that was loud. As explained elsewhere in the Bhagavatam, how it talks about the state of Vasudeva, how through this process of hearing, because Vasudeva has many different meanings, but one of the meanings of Vasudeva is Vishuddha Sattva, or this state of purified goodness. And so when one achieves the state of Vasudeva, it means that when the heart becomes pure, when the consciousness becomes pure, then this is the suitable place for Vasudeva, or Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to reside within one's heart. So the heart has to become purified, and that's what it's talking about here. How the heart becomes purified and the Lord will reside within one's heart. And the point that Parikshit Maharaj is making, a very, very nice point, is that by regularly and always hearing the Bhagavatam, by being constantly absorbed in hearing the Bhagavatam, then the heart becomes purified. It's such an extraordinary process that simply by hearing the Bhagavatam, and we see earlier on in the, I think it's in the 5th chapter of the 1st canto, it talks how, I think it's Sutta Goswami is talking about how he was hearing Sukadeva Goswami speak with rapt attention. And then Prabhupada, he takes this word and he expands on this and how important it is to be completely absorbed in hearing the Bhagavatam. And then when we become absorbed in hearing the Bhagavatam, the benefits that we will gain. And as the same point that's been explained here. Now just to backtrack a little bit, if we go to the end of the last chapter, from verse 50 onwards, we see how Brahma is speaking to Narad Muni. And Brahma is saying to Narad, okay, I've given you like a synopsis of the process of bhakti. Now I want you to take that synopsis and expand on it. He's asking him, he's actually empowering him to become a preacher, to spread Krishna consciousness throughout the universe. And we see, and this is really interesting, who's the main person in the Bhagavatam? Who's the main personality we see throughout the Bhagavatam? There's only one canto he doesn't appear in. It's Narad Muni. In every single canto of the Bhagavatam, he is presenting Krishna consciousness. He has, and so many disciples, every major personality we see that's being spoken about in the Bhagavatam is Narad Muni's disciple in some way or another, either initiated disciple or a Siksha disciple. So many personalities, Dhruv Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, all these great personalities are all disciples of Narad Muni. So we see here, and the first canto essentially is kind of setting the scene for the rest of the Bhagavatam, and we see that Sukadeva Goswami appears in the first canto, Narad Muni appears in the first canto, and we see these lovely instructions of Narad Muni to Vyasadeva, because Vyasadeva is also Narad Muni's disciple. So we see how Brahma is empowering his son Narad to present the Bhagavatam. And now we see here in the first 6 verses, Parikshit Maharaj is so enlivened after hearing this conversation. He's saying, well, how did Narad Muni present this? And we see the subsequent cantos of the Bhagavatam, it's discussing how he presented this, the knowledge of the Bhagavatam, or how he presented the Bhagavatam for others to understand. And we see many, many wonderful stories. Sometimes, based on, Narad Muni is like the perfect preacher. He's actually very, very extraordinary. You see, in so many different situations, he'll present the same philosophy in very, very different ways. Sometimes he'll present very directly, like when he's speaking to Narad Muni, with Yudhisthira Maharaj. Yudhisthira Maharaj sits down, he's humbly listening. And he's just drinking the nectar of Narad Muni's instructions. We see this is there in the Bhagavatam. But then also we can see the story Prachinabhahi. So Prachinabhahi, he was so attached to fruitive activities and the benefits he would get from fruitive activities. Narad Muni can understand, I can't present the philosophy to him directly. Therefore he presents an allegorical story. And it's like a story within a story, because we see within the story he tells to Puranjana, he talks about Puranjana. And then how Puranjana becomes a goat in his next life. And then at one point, the light goes on for Prachinabhahi, and he thinks, oh my God, I'm that goat. He realizes that I'm behaving just like a goat, and that point. So we see, he gives everything up. So we see how Narad Muni is able to present the philosophy of Krishna consciousness in a way that is just suitable for the audience. So and we see that's what's going on here. We see that Brahmaji, he explained to Narad Muni. He said, present this philosophy of Krishna consciousness in a way that the audience will understand it. And that's really, really, really important for us, because it's like, okay, we can go out and present Bhagavad Gita straight to people, but some people just won't get it. You can bang people over the head with the Bhagavad Gita as much as you like, but some people just won't get it. Some people will. So the idea is to understand the philosophy well enough so that we can present it in a way suitable for time, place, and circumstance. And it's really, really interesting. There's a purport in the I think it's in the 4th canto, the 24th chapter, where Prabhupada talks about deity worship, and in there he says, Dhruva Maharaj is worshipping the Lord, and under the instructions of Narad Muni, by the way, and because Narad Muni says to him, he says, you have to worship the deity according to time, place, and available attendant conveniences and inconveniences. So he's saying you have to adapt things according to the circumstance. And that's very much the case in this material world, is the circumstances are constantly changing, just like now. I mean, just, wind the clock back 2 years, right? And look at now. 2 years ago, would you have ever thought we'd be living in the circumstances we're living in now? The world just is constantly changing. And therefore, we need to be able to adapt our presentation of Krishna consciousness. And I'm not saying to water down the principles of Krishna consciousness, because I very much believe that there are basic fundamental principles that can never be changed. But sometimes we need to be able to present certain elements of Krishna consciousness in a way that devotees can digest, or that people can digest it. And so now we see that how much the world has changed. So how much do we need to adapt? Like you see that most of our senior devotees were constantly traveling 2 years ago. How many visiting sannyasis have we had in the last 2 years? 2. Yeah. So life has changed. So, but you can go online and attend their Zoom classes. You can listen to them on. There's so much. So much has been adapted. I mean, many of our senior devotees are giving. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many classes they're giving each week online. Sometimes way more than they were giving before. It's like practically every day they're doing 2, 3, 4, 5 classes. And it's really effective. Devotees, people are becoming inspired by Krishna consciousness through this preaching. So it's quite interesting. Yeah, we see here in this section here now that Parikshit Maharaj has heard Sukadeva Goswami describing, this conversation between Brahma and Narad Muni, and now he's enlivened. So these first 6 verses here, he's glorifying the Bhagavatam. Very, very, profound glorification. You can see he has deep realization of the potency of the Bhagavatam. And so, so these 6 verses, he's glorifying the Bhagavatam. And then in the 7th verse, he starts up with questions. I think from the 7th verse to the 23rd verse, he starts questioning Shukadeva Goswami. So lots of really, really interesting questions coming up. But this verse in particular I found quite interesting, because for me it kind of, it sort of takes me back to the 2nd chapter of the 1st canto. Many, many verses there. First off, we see the first line. It says Srimata Shalaya. So we'll just take those 2 words. If we look at Srimata Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana, Hridyantosti Bhadrani, Vidunoti Suritastam. So we see that's from the 2nd chapter, 17th verse. It said, the personality of Godhead is the Paramatma, the super soul in everyone's heart. And the benefactor of the truthful devotee cleanses the desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge to hear his message, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. So it's talking about the benefit of hearing and chanting. And that's exactly what Parikshit Maharaj is glorifying here, is the benefit of hearing and chanting. But not just anything. You can hear and chant mundane topics, and all you have to do is spend time with non-devotees. You see, that's what they're talking about all the time, is they're talking about mundane topics, or topics not directly focused on Krishna. We can understand that to be mundane topics. And so that has its effect. The result of engaging in vibrating mundane sound vibrations, as it's pointed out by Krishna to Arjuna in the Gita, is this karma bandhana. We become bound up in material activities. But the result of spending our time to hear and chant the glories of Krishna is that we become, all the anarthas within the heart are destroyed, and we become completely attached to the service of Krishna. We become completely attached to Krishna. And we see so much so in the case with Suta Goswami, also with Parikshit Maharaj, is they were just relishing everything that was being spoken about Krishna. And there's one verse there where it says Suta Mahabhaga, I think it's the 4th chapter of the 1st canto, where the sages of Namasharanya, they're just praising Suta Goswami and saying, Suta, oh most fortunate Suta, where just every word you say is just like nectar drops coming from your mouth, and they're just saying, speak more, speak more. And that's exactly what Parikshit is doing here. He's saying to Sukadeva Goswami, please speak more, please speak more. I'm relishing everything you're saying. And not only is he relishing it, but he's understanding that through this process of hearing the pastimes of Krishna, that I'm going to become purified, I'm going to become liberated, I'm going to actually, at the end of 7 days, be able to go back to Godhead. Because that's his purpose here. He's been cursed by Shringi that he's got 7 days left to live. And because he is supremely intelligent, he's not just like an ordinary ruler, he's not like Scott Morrison or someone like that, He's like a supremely intelligent person. He understands what the purpose of life is for. He understands the purpose of life is to understand our intrinsic nature as an eternal servant of Krishna, and to reconnect with Krishna and go back home to God at the end of his life. He's got the point. And therefore, he doesn't want to waste 1 second of his life. He doesn't want to waste 1 second, so he wants to just engage himself completely in hearing about Krishna. And he's realized this is the best thing to do. Therefore, he's saying to Sukadeva Goswami, please tell me more about the Bhagavatam. Tell me more of the story, the topics of the Bhagavatam. So he's very, very enlivened. Then the next verse that this triggered for me was, it says Shrimatam Shalaya Nityam, this verse Nityam, or this word Nityam. The next verse in the 2nd canto says Nasta Prayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Then it says Bhagavat Yutama Sloke Bhakti Bhavati Naistiki. Again, it's talking about by regular attendance or by regularly hearing the Bhagavatam. And actually it says Bhagavata Sevaya, by serving. So the way we serve the Bhagavatam is we hear the Bhagavatam and we speak the Bhagavatam. And there's a really interesting purport that that Srila Prabhupada discusses the benefits of speaking the Bhagavatam, and he said actually speaking the Bhagavatam is more beneficial than reading the Bhagavatam. He said this is the best way of serving the Bhagavatam, is to speak the Bhagavatam to others, to give others this transcendental message that's been given here by Sukadeva Goswami to Parikshit Maharaj. Because as we see Lord Chaitanya, he points out that this is the the spotless Purana. This is the supreme Purana. This is the most beneficial thing. And we see also in the first canto, there's what's that verse? It says this Bhagavat Purana is as brilliant as the sun, and persons who have lost their vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance in this age of Purana, in this age of Kali, will get light from hearing this Purana. So it's established, Lord Chaitanya establishes it, the Bhagavatam itself establishes it. This Srimad Bhagavatam is the most effective, the most powerful way of someone in this age of Kali gaining knowledge or gaining understanding of their situation and giving up the material conditioning. This is why hearing the Bhagavatam is so important. And we see that Parikshit Maharaj is making this statement here, that those who take the matter very seriously, those who listen very seriously to the Bhagavatam, very quickly Krishna will come and reside in their heart. This is the purifying nature of the Bhagavatam. Just by this process of purification from hearing the Bhagavatam, then and as it mentions in the second canto, it says all that is troublesome to the heart is almost this is nasta prayesha bhadreshu. All these troublesome things are almost completely destroyed, and loving devotional service to the Transcendental Lord becomes established as an irrevocable fact. If you take this hearing the Bhagavatam seriously, then the devotional service will become established as an irrevocable, as a really important, strong word that Prabhupada uses. And I think someone, maybe it's Krishna Rupa Maharaj, he was making the point the other day, how sometimes Prabhupada would meditate on these words in his translations for quite some time. Sometimes even a day or two he'd be meditating on just the right word. And then if we look carefully at the words that Prabhupada uses in his verses and purports, you can see these are the perfect words to express the meaning there. And when he says, establish it as an irrevocable fact, what does that mean? It means you cannot cancel it, you cannot stop it. It becomes permanently established in your heart. This loving devotional service to the Transcendental Lord. And then another interesting word I found here was grinatascha svachestitam, that regularly always taking the matter very, basically to take it very serious. So again, in the second chapter of the first canto, Chacharadhana Chamunayo Jnana Vairagya Yuktaya Pasyantyatmani Chatmanam Bhaktya Shruta Grihitaya. The seriously inquisitive student or sage, well equipped with knowledge and detachment, realizes the absolute truth by rendering devotional service in terms of what he's heard from Vedanta Shruti. So again, the seriously inquisitive student, you have to be, to actually understand this process, you have to be very serious. It's not something you can understand by, casual reading or as Prabhupada's talking about here in the purport, the Bhagavat Saptaha type of approach, where you just go for 7 days and that's it, and you just want to hear, about Krishna's intimate pastimes with the gopis of Vrindavan, just to aggravate or to inspire licentious behavior. This is not what the Bhagavatam is about. The purpose of studying the Bhagavatam is to develop love of Godhead. And the only way we can develop love of Godhead, and Prabhupada mentions this in the purport, he talks about their desires to see the Lord personally without meeting the requisite qualifications. One has to have the requisite qualification. And the preliminary qualification is we have no material contamination in the heart. That all these contaminations are destroyed, because when the contamination is destroyed, when there's no material influence remaining in the heart, then we achieve, as I mentioned before, this state of Vasudeva. And that's the place where Krishna can reside. Only in a pure heart can Krishna manifest. Or he can manifest anywhere, of course, but only in a pure heart will Krishna manifest. So, as Prabhupada's pointing out here, the requisite qualification. Then Yeah, so I thought this was a particularly powerful verse. And then another interesting point that's made here in the third line, it says, Kalena nati dirgena. And this reminded me of the verse, a well-known verse, the Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojate. Janaya Yasu, but Yasu means very, very short time, Vairagyam. That by rendering devotional service to the personality of God, one immediately acquires causes knowledge and detachment from the world. So this, as I said, asu means very soon. So by the process of bhakti, very quickly, the Lord resides in the heart. Very quickly, we achieve this devotional service through the process of bhakti. So this is indicating how powerful the process of bhakti is. That you can do so many other things. You can practice mystic yoga for millions of lifetimes. And there's a nice verse in the Brahma Samhita where it talks about this Muni Pungavanam, where it talks about how the Munis they may drill the respiratory system for thousands of lifetimes. Actually, I think it says for millions of lifetimes, and they can't even approach the tip of the toe of the lotus feet of the Lord. Even though they're practicing for many, many millions of lifetimes. But the process of bhakti is so powerful that it very quickly brings one to the process of reawakening this love of Godhead. And there's an interesting allegorical story I just wanted to share with you as the last thing I wanted to say. That Lord Chaitanya, he explains to Sanatana Goswami in the 20th chapter of the Madhya Lila, and it's just after Lord Sanatana Goswami asks Mahaprabhu, says, but I don't even know who I am. People are saying I'm a great soul, but Kayami, who am I? He says, I don't even know, I don't even know who I am. And so then Lord Chaitanya is explaining to him the process of bhakti, and then he points out the powerful nature, the extraordinary nature of the process of bhakti, and how you can practice these other processes, jnana, vairagya, all these different things, so much difficulty. And Krishna makes this same point at the beginning of the 12th chapter of the Gita, how like for those who are on this path of impersonal realization, so much difficulty, but actually on the transcendental path, and I know like sometimes we experience difficulties in devotional service, but in comparison to what people are experiencing in these other processes, it's insignificant. It's seriously insignificant. I'll tell you, I'll try and... So Lord Chaitanya tells a parable or an allegorical story, and he talks about how once this learned astrologer called Savakya visited the house of a poor man, and he saw this poor man was suffering, and he was asking, why are you suffering? And being an astrologer, very, very powerful astrologer, obviously with a name like Savakya means he knows everything. So he could understand why the poor man was suffering. He says, no, actually because your father, he was very, very rich, but he died in another place. You weren't there when he died, so he didn't reveal where his treasure was hidden. He had a huge treasure, and you don't know where it is, therefore you're lamenting. He says, but I can tell you where the treasure is. So he said, the treasure is buried in this place. But if you go digging on the north side, let's see, I want to get this right. Oh, sorry, he starts off, if you dig on the southern side, you'll get harassed by wasps and drones. And you'll not get the treasure. If you dig on the western side, there is a ghost who will create such a disturbance for you that you will not even touch the treasure. Then if you dig on the northern side, there's a big black snake that will devour you if you attempt to dig up the treasure. But if you dig on the eastern side, you'll find the treasure after very little digging. So it's really interesting. Then there's a number of purports there, but in one of the purports, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur explains this parable or this allegorical story. So he's saying that the Vedic literatures, including the Puranas, state that according to the position of the conditioned soul, there are different processes: karma kanda, jnana kanda, the yogic process, and the bhakti process. So the southern side, it refers to the karma kanda process. So if one tries to realize the self through the karma kanda process, it only ends in material gain. And it's compared to the wasps and drones that will simply bite you if you take shelter. Yeah? And that's explained further. So, if we engage, so the wasp and drones that bite you. Now, this is the interesting part of this analogy. It's just like when you do karma kanda, you're actually under the auspices of Yamaraj. So you're performing fruitive activities, and because you're performing fruitive activities, there is karma. There's reaction to that. So if you're in the cycle of karma, then that is Yamaraj's domain. So it means like, okay, you may spend in this life spend your time performing so many karmic activities, but at the end of the life you'll have to get the results of those karmic activities. That means you may go down to Yamaraj's abode, you'll be punished by the Yamadutas in this way, or you might get some benefits, but then your children will want to take it from you, and there's so many different things going on there, and you're suffering in so many different ways. And then but when you follow the fruitive process, the material desires remain prominent. It takes a long time to become free from that. And as a result of being engaged in material activities, we suffer. We're in this cycle of birth, this samsara, this cycle of birth and death, and we suffer birth after birth in this material world. So that's like the wasp and drones. So he's saying, don't take shelter of the karma kanda process. You will not achieve the treasure. Then jnana kanda, the western side, the process of mental speculations, or sometimes called siddhi kanda, is simply like a ghost who creates mental disturbances. So I'm sure many of you have had experience of people who are ghostly haunted, and their minds are always very, very disturbed. Yeah? So the jnana kind of process is like that, and because they're always in the mind trying to understand this, as Prabhupada will sometimes talk about, this neti. It's not this, it's not that. Or what is it? They don't know. So the jnana kanda always, agitating the mind to try to understand this, to try to understand it, but never really understanding anything. And again, Lord Chaitanya points out, you will not achieve the treasure. And then the mystic yoga process is compared to a black snake that devours the living entity and injects him with the poison. What's the poison? Is the impersonalist or Mayavadi philosophy that I am that, I am God, I am the Supreme. It's a poison, and when the poison's injected into your system, we see there's that pastime in Gaura Leela where Advaita, I think it was Advaita Acharya, was going down listening to the Mayavadis, and Mahaprabhu became very, very upset with him because he was making the point that once you hear this, this Mayavadi Vashyasuni Hoy Savanas, he said, you hear this Mayavadi philosophy, your consciousness, your understanding will become completely contaminated and destroyed. You'll never understand properly. It'll always influence you. So the mystic yoga process, or this impersonalistic understanding, is like a black snake that injects poison and then devours the living entity. He said, but on the eastern side represents devotional service to Lord Krishna. And as we see in the allegorical story, after a little bit of digging, and that's the point that Parikshit Maharaj is saying here, that just by seriously taking this process, hearing the Bhagavatam, after a very short time, we see with the other processes, they'll be digging for years, and they'll never find anything. But through the bhakti process, after a very short time, and okay, maybe we've been devotees for 10 years, or 20 years, or 30, or 40, 50, 60 years, but if you look at how long we've been in this universe, that's such a short time. It's such a short time. It's just like the blink of an eyelid, practically. And we'll come to the point of pure Krishna consciousness as long as we take this seriously. And in other words, Mahaprabhu is saying, in other words, through the bhakti yoga process, one's hands touch the hidden treasure without difficulty. Really, even though you may think it's difficult in devotion, controlling the senses, controlling the mind, following the regular principles, even though you may think that's difficult, if you look at the austerities that people in other practices have to go to, it's insignificant. It's just insignificant, and it's all based on our, we're experiencing these difficulties due to our past karma, due to our attachments. But the process of bhakti itself is very, very simple. So simple. And it's on the eastern side, Mahaprabhu says, on the eastern side, devotional service enables one to attain life's real goal. The treasure of life is to reawaken our loving devotional service to Krishna. This is the real treasure of life. And as Krishna points out, it says, Susukam kartamavyam. It's everlasting, it's joyfully performed. We actually become satisfied through the process of bhakti. We won't become satisfied through these other processes. And this is the point that Parikshit Maharaj is making here. By awakening this love of Krishna, then I'll actually become satisfied here. And at the point he's getting to will achieve the goal of going back to Godhead. Okay, so I'll finish there. Any questions, comments? Yes, pardon. Clearly.
Thank you very much for this class. I was thinking about, you were speaking about the hearing process and the immense benefits from, regularly hearing Srimad Bhagavatam and also taking it very seriously. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the flip side of that, which is when we expose our ears to hearing material sounds, material discourses, how that really interferes with the devotional process, because then those material things end up filling up our ears, and then there's no room for.
Well, it's just like the battery being flat in the microphone. Yeah? So it's like you're trying to speak into the microphone because the battery's flat, you're getting all this interference. So you can't really understand what's being said. So it's just like that. If we're interested in material topics and we're vibrating material topics or absorbing material topics, then it interferes. So, okay, we may be getting some benefit, but because it's like, we're lighting the fire and we're pouring water at the same time. It's not really going to work so well. It'll work to some extent, but to the degree you're able to give up material attachment, to the degree you're able to give up material sound vibrations, to that degree you're going to get the benefit of devotional service. But there's a nice analogy Prabhupada uses in another purport, where he said it's just like, when one purely takes this process, it's just like when you put a flame to gunpowder. It just takes off. I don't know if you've ever seen gunpowder when you put a flame to it. It's not like it's just like it slowly fizzles. It just goes rapidly. It doesn't go, it bursts into a flame, but it's like, it's just, the fire just sort of travels very, very rapidly. So it's the same for that. Like when we just focus on hearing the holy name and hearing the Bhagavatam and chanting the holy name and speaking the Bhagavatam, when we this Svakata Krishna, these topics of Krishna, then it becomes a spontaneous thing, and you can't stop it. You can't stop it. You can't stop. You can't stop. Like Mahaprabhu was speaking with Gopal Guru, and when he was a child, and he was talking about how his tongue was so affected by chanting that he couldn't stop it. So that when he was going to the bathroom, he was actually biting his tongue to stop his tongue chanting the holy name. He was so overpowered, overwhelmed by the name, that he couldn't stop himself from vibrating. So it becomes like that. It's described in the scriptures how it becomes like that. I mean, obviously I'm not experiencing it, but it becomes like that for the living entity when they become absorbed in hearing and chanting, that they can't stop, and neither can they stop hearing. And that's where Parikshit Maharaj is right now. He's so inspired by what Sukadeva Goswami is speaking, is he doesn't want him to stop. Just speak more, speak more. Please go on. And that's how we can understand where we are in devotional service, is how inspired are we to hear? How inspired are we to speak? And not just, when I speak, people like the way I speak and you get followers and things. That's got nothing to do with it. It's like, is it your love for Krishna being awoken? Are you seeing that others are being inspired in Krishna consciousness? And that's what Brahmaji was instructing to Narad, is you speak Krishna consciousness so that other people's dormant Krishna consciousness is awoken. It's not just about, it's got nothing to do with, followers or becoming famous as a speaker. We see like, I know one devotee in Chaupati, Shamananda, and his father was his grandfather, I think it was his grandfather, was a famous Bhagavad Saptaha speaker in India. And he would be so expert at speaking that people would cry from the way he would speak. But was their dormant love of Krishna awoken? No. So what's the point? It's just about followers, and that's not what the hearing and chanting is for. It's not what the process of devotional service is for. But, these are like the weeds that come up. These are things that come along with it, but they're actually weeds, and we have to root out these desires and just focus on the real purpose. Krishna's mercy.
Thank you so much for the class. Just a question. You were talking about how valuable it is to speak Bhagavatam, and by the speaking you're hearing. I'm just wondering, in terms of our private study of Srimad Bhagavatam, do you think it's better to recite or read out loud so that you're reading and hearing? Do you think that makes a difference?
I remember asking Ramai Swami this question about 30 years ago. Well, basically what Maharaj told me was if that's what works for you, as long as it's not disturbing others.
I mean in your private study.
Yeah, private study. I mean that's what I do at home. Is I read it out loud because I find it more of the senses are engaged. But then it's very good to read, to study. Obviously, we should be studying the Bhagavatam every day. But more important is what you read, then share that with others. Because otherwise it's just like a Bhajananandi who's got so much knowledge that he's not sharing. But Prabhupada made the point that a Goshtianandi, the person who shares that knowledge, they're more dear to Krishna. And the same point is made at the end of the 18th chapter. That person who gives this knowledge of Bhagavad Gita to others, that person is the most dear to me. And so the one who's study the knowledge, yes, very good, but share the knowledge as well. That's the thing that's really pleasing to Krishna, is we share this knowledge. And that's exactly what Lord Brahma has told Narad Muni to do. Is okay, I'm giving you this knowledge, now you expand it, you share it with others, so that their Krishna consciousness is awoken.
That's a very good way of retaining what you've read too.
Yeah, it really consolidates your realizations. If you have to speak on what you've read, then it really stimulates realization, because then you're actually putting it into practice rather than just being gyan. It becomes vigyan. You put it into practice. And one of the things often I find happens is when we speak philosophy to others, at least it causes me to look at, am I doing this myself? I'm telling them, well, you should be doing this and you should be doing that, but am I doing it? And then I become more inspired to try to be a better devotee.
Thank you.
Krishna Kirtan Prabhu.
My question is on the verse itself, this notion of short time. You read many Shastras and you read the CCs, Chaitanya Bhagavat. Not after the end of most chapters you get these benedictions in a short time you can achieve Krishna praying. So the question is, or two parts, this short time, the Bhagavatam, does the Bhagavatam deal in sort of time that we consider short time, or that we consider short time, because 50 years or 40 years or whatever, but some people would be a long time. And then so we know all the short time, and the cloud away for a moment of the whole year. And Mahavishnu, Lord Brahma's life is 3/4 of a second. So because these verses, excuse me, are very encouraging, and that make you go on. And the other part of the question is the Lord manifesting in your heart. Are we talking about the superstar we can't reveal, or a different manifestation of the Lord?
Okay, so the first part is I take this literally. It's saying here that because also the word ashu means like a very short time, yeah. And kalena also means very, very short. Not talking about, it's not a relative time according to the person's talking. Kalena means like moments, seconds, sort of thing. And if we look at examples, for instance, of personalities like who was that king who was fighting for the Devatas? And then the Devatas wanted to offer him a benediction, and he said, yeah, I want to know when I'm going to die. And he said, well, you have just a few moments to live. That wasn't Katvanga, was it? It was Katvanga, I think. Katvanga Maharaj. And the Devatas said, oh, you have just a moment to live, a few moments to live. So he sat down immediately and just dedicated his life to becoming Krishna conscious. And Prabhupada would say that you can become Krishna conscious in a moment. But the Prabhupada is saying here about the requisite qualifications. Because we don't have the requisite qualifications, therefore that moment or that very soon is maybe quite a long time. Once you have the requisite qualifications, so that's what's taking the time, is getting the requisite qualifications. So, Parikshit Maharaj is giving us guidance here, very clear guidance on what the requisite qualifications are. Nityam, meaning always absorbed in the pastimes of the Lord, always hearing the Bhagavatam, and swachestitam. By your endeavour, swa means you, chestitam, very serious. You're very absorbed in the Bhagavatam. You take it very seriously. It's not just something else we do. We live the Bhagavatam. And in terms of the second part of your question, the way I take that is we see here, because the word in the verse is Bhagavan, which means the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But Prabhupada's been very specific about that. And he said the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. So that's not even though we understand that Paramatma is an expansion of the Lord, etc. Because he's purposely said Sri Krishna, then we understand that this is talking about Sri Krishna, the personality of God, being personally manifest in our heart. Because the verse, this from the Bhagavatam, Nasa Prayasha Bhadrasha Nityam Bhagavatam. So that verse talks about how the Paramatma becomes manifest in the heart, or you become aware of the Paramatma's presence. But in this here, to me, this is talking about Krishna directly being manifest in your heart. Otherwise, Prabhupada wouldn't have been so specific about it and put Sri Krishna there. He would have said Paramatma or something else. Huh? Yeah, Swanasuya. Yeah. Would you have any comment, Maharaj? Do you have any comment on Krishna Kirtan for this question?
Good answer. Good answer.
I just wanted to maybe add that when we're reading Srimad Bhagavatam out loud, I'll just ask you if this is also correct, that all the other living entities also benefit as well, like all the bugs and worms and all the organisms. So I always think like that when I'm reading out loud.
So how loud do you read?
If I'm reading by myself, it's loud so I can hear.
Because Thakur Haridas used to chant very, very loudly, because he was of. Mahaprabhu asked him which chanting is better, the soft chanting, quiet chanting, or silent chanting or chanting loudly. And he said that loud chanting is best because then other living entities benefit. So he used to chant quite loudly. But then I guess, I mean, we've all had the experience when we're chanting japa in the temple room in the morning, and you might get a devotee who's chanting really loudly, and it's like you can't hear your own chanting. So, time, place, and circumstance, you've got to, be mindful of other people's needs as well, because we want them to benefit from hearing the holy name they're chanting as well. So,
I have a question about Narayana as well. Is he still traveling within the different universes? Is it kind of thing we just don't have the consciousness to see anymore?
Narad Muni is eternal spaceman, so he's eternally traveling. And see, Narad Muni is a really interesting person. And it's like some people might even interpret him as being a troublemaker, but he's not, because his whole intention is simply to evoke God consciousness in people, simply to facilitate or accelerate Krishna's pastimes. Just like when we the story of when Devaki and Vasudeva were in the jail cell, and that Kamsa had heard that the 8th child will kill you. So first off there was one child, and but this is not the one. So he was not going to do anything about it, But then we see that Narad Muni, he came and said, actually it could be any of the children. Why are you believing a voice in the sky? It could be any. So he was just wanting to accelerate Krishna's pastime. So then what happened was Kamsa killed every child. So he plays a really big role in Krishna's pastimes. Really, really big role. He's very much involved in facilitating the appearance of the Lord, and facilitating the devotees' interaction with the Lord, and facilitating devotees developing their Krishna consciousness. Very, very important personality in our line.
And then there's pastimes where Narada Muni actually came to the kirtan.
Yeah, in London. Yeah. Conway Hall.
I could see Narada Muni, he started suddenly singing Narada Muni by day.
Yeah. Very, very important personality. Okay, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi.